Well, hello, everyone. My name is Jihan Oh, and I am so glad to be here with you all. As those titles of slide that you're seeing on the screen says, divest, invest is complicated, and that explains a little bit the size of the team that you are seeing before you. We're here representing many of the different moving parts within our denomination that coordinate in order to do the thinking around the divestment and investment and how we actually steward our resources within the denomination in order to impact corporate bodies. And so we have a team here. We're also really sad not to be in Massanutten Springs, where the larger part of the group is, but also really glad to be here in Minnesota with a small but mighty group. And this location worked out in terms of where we were all coming from and our schedules and our ability to travel here to be in person. And so grateful that we can do this with you. What I'm going to do is ask each member of this team up here to introduce themselves. And I think there was a question about where we were all coming from. So we'll ask folks to introduce themselves by name and role and where they're coming from as we get started. So Brad, you want to get started?
All right, good to be with you all. Brad Masters, Vice President of Client Engagement for the New Covenant Trust Company, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Presbyterian Church Foundation, and flew in this morning from Louisville, Kentucky. It's good to be here.
And I'm James Carey, Director of Investments for New Covenant Trust Company. I do our investment strategy and portfolio management work, but also our responsible investing research and development. So really happy to be here. Thanks for having us, and looking forward to the workshop.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be with you. I'm Greg Rousseau. I've been with the Presbyterian Foundation and New Covenant Trust Company for, can't believe it's over 23 years now, located in Louisville, Kentucky. I am the president of New Covenant Trust Company, and I'm also an officer of the Presbyterian Foundation. So wonderful to be with you.
And I am Jihan Oh. I am based out of Atlanta, Georgia, but work for the Office of the General Assembly located in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm here as a member of the Committee on Mission Responsibility through Investment, as a representative from the New Covenant Trust Company Board.
And I am Carrie Allen, and I am the chair of the Mission Responsibility through Investment Committee. I am a mission and spiritual care healthcare executive, live in Chicago, but a member of the Milwaukee Presbytery. And great to be home in Minnesota with y'all.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rob Ford. I'm the lead staff person to the Committee on Mission Responsibility through Investment, which is administratively housed in the Presbyterian Mission Agency, which is based in Louisville, Kentucky, from where I came today. Great to be with you all.
So what we hope to do during this time is to offer a high-level overview of the ecosystem of responsible investing, how those parts actually work with one another, what sort of roles they play, and how we actually then do socially responsible investing within the PCUSA. The Committee on Mission Responsibility for Investment works on behalf of the denomination, serving as ambassadors of Presbyterian values, which were voted on by all of our previous assemblies. And so the values that are defined by our General Assembly to corporate boardrooms, while the New Covenant Trust Company serves Presbyterian institutions and individuals and institutions, including big councils like presbyteries and synods, to help them invest their money in ways that are aligned with the values of the PCUSA. And so before we get into more of the details, we want to share a video introduction of MRTI, the Committee on Mission Responsibility through Investment. And this was created in partnership with the Presbyterian Foundation.
What is MRTI? MRTI stands for the Committee on Mission Responsibility through Investment. Through MRTI, the Presbyterian Church pushes businesses to adopt practices that are not harmful to the environment, better for workers, prevent human trafficking, and more. These align with Presbyterian values and with how Christ calls us to take care of the world and each other. How does it work? MRTI is a committee created by the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church, whose members represent 6 GA-related entities. MRTI also has staff who handle most of the conversations conducted with businesses and their leadership. This is done through using the shares held in the portfolios of the Presbyterian Foundation and the Board of Pensions. Both of those agencies hold stock in companies to use the earnings to benefit the PCUSA through funding retirement beneficiaries and funding important mission work. Holding stock in a company gives a shareholder the unique ability to bring attention to key issues. How does MRTI choose the companies? Companies are selected because these companies have practices or policies that are out of alignment with PCUSA values. The investing agencies of the PCUSA hold stock in the companies. We work in coalitions to join forces with other faith and values-based investors. Does it work? Yes. Often companies do change their practices. MRTI has a rigorous process for evaluating select companies, color-coding companies after thoroughly researching their business practices. MRTI actions have successfully moved companies in the right direction many times since it started in 1972. Here are a few examples. Helped bring pressure to end the apartheid regime in South Africa. Hotel chains and airlines have trained staff at all levels on how to spot and prevent human trafficking. Companies are committing to more transparency of their lobbying efforts related to climate change issues. What happens when it doesn't work? If a company doesn't respond to our letters, phone calls, and invitations to meet, MRTI may recommend that the agencies of the Presbyterian Church USA sell stock in the company and not buy any more stock in those companies. This is called divestment. This is an important tool, and it's the last tool of shareholder engagement. It is always our hope to influence corporations to be better actors for people and for the planet. When we walk away, we lose that influence. This may be warranted if companies make inadequate effort to change. But it is always our goal to cause lasting change in business practices that make a positive impact on people and planet. Want to know more? You can find more information on the MRTI website at presbyterianmission.org/MRTI.
And now I'll pass it over to MRTI Chair Carrie Allen.
Thank you. Next slide. So here's a look at what we will cover today. This overview here will provide an overview. MRTI follows 3 foundational policies, including this from 1971, which outlined original goals for Presbyterian investments, and that those included the pursuit of peace, racial justice, economic and social justice, the achievement of environmental responsibility, and the advancement of rights for women. All of MRTI's current work still falls under one of these goals. However, over the last few years, we focus most heavily on environmental responsibility as directed by the last 3 General Assemblies. Next slide. So this PCUS foundational policy established a policy on social responsible investing, declaring that no investment is neutral. It echoed the priority areas from the 1971 policy. Next slide. This policy was adopted by the 196th General Assembly in 1984 and functioned as an important agreement between GA and investing agencies. It effectively creates the conditions that if divestment is done in this way, the investing agencies can implement it. So the policy lays out these 7 criteria that must be met for MRTI to make a selective divestment recommendation. Next slide. The PCUSA is unique among faith-based investors because MRTI includes representatives from the mission arm, the advisory, and the advocacy committees, as well as from our investing agencies. It is truly a committee of the General Assembly, as every one of our members is elected by the General Assembly, either directly through the General Assembly nominating committees process, like 3 at-large members, or through advocacy and advisory committees and boards of the 3 agencies. Faith-based investors, like the Presbyterian Church, have a unique role in shareholder advocacy ecosystem and are often bringing emerging issues to companies that then become major issues down the road. Next slide. We have theological underpinnings for our work, and communal discernment and guidance of the Holy Spirit underpin our MRTI's work. The Mission Responsibility through Investment Committee understands that its role is to be guided by the Holy Spirit. MRTI emphasizes the power of communal discernment, and MRTI recognizes the urgency of environmental and social issues, like the climate crisis. Next slide. Now I'm going to pass it along to my colleague, Rob Ford, to talk more about the denomination's corporate engagement efforts.
Thank you, Carrie. So this is to give you a little flavor for the tactics of how social responsible investing are implemented. So MRTI and our partners in this area kind of do this work with kind of 3 ways. So there's negative screening, meaning the companies that we don't invest in or that we produce on our annual divestment list. Currently, there are 123 companies that are out of compliance with Presbyterian values as articulated by the General Assembly. I'll talk about that a little more later. So that's a negative screening, companies you don't invest in, and that includes military-related weapons producers, tobacco, for-profit prisons, human rights violators, and now environmental policy companies that are running afoul of our environmental policy. So that's what MRTI. On the positive screening side, that's something that my colleagues from NCTC will talk about. That's companies that we do invest in for a particular reason, and colleague James will talk a little bit about that later on. What MRTI does primarily, though, is shareholder advocacy. And what that is, it was mentioned by Jihan earlier, that is us being the ambassadors of Presbyterian values to publicly traded corporations. So the investing agencies of the PCUSA, Presbyterian Church Foundation, Board of Pensions own stock in companies. And the shareholders, we have access to representatives from these companies where we meet with them and articulate how we want to see them be more in alignment with the Presbyterian values. Now, we come at that from a theological impetus, but we have to, as investors, we have to quickly translate that over into a business case, and to translate that over into and communicate what we think is, that we care for theological reasons, a creation care or caring for all of God's children related to human rights risks. We have to say that there is an unmanaged or undermanaged business risk that they're not recognizing, and we think that will impact their bottom line. So again, that's kind of the faith-based investor perspective that we bring. We also do direct community engagement, and that has really ramped up for the last 4 years or so, where we engage with communities, frontline communities, civil society organizations, NGOs that are either in frontline communities or are representing frontline communities that are being negatively impacted by, could be negative effects of climate change or operations by a particular company. We also do some public policy engagements, and we do some direct engagement with regulatory agencies, most recently and most specifically with the Securities and Exchange Commission, which governs some of the key work that we do. Finally, the third tactic is community investing or impact investing, and that's something that is done through our colleagues at the Presbyterian Foundation. And again, that is something about the idea is that an investor would accept less than a market rate of return to invest in something that is going to do some kind of social good. Next slide, please. So a little bit more about the P2SA and shareholder advocacy. The ultimate goal of shareholder advocacy is to create positive change within companies. And MRTI engages companies on a variety of issues concerning the environment, climate change, healthcare and human rights, and banking and finance. And here's some of the ways in these bullet points that we think about that. And again, the ultimate goal is to encourage positive change within a company. Next slide, please. Here's an example of some select companies that we have engaged in recent years only on environmental climate change issues. Now you'll see here there are a lot of oil and gas companies that are kind of on the supply side, shall we say, of fossil fuels, but also those that are on the high demand side, heavy emitters of fossil fuels like airlines, like automobile companies, publicly traded utility companies, and a few banks and insurers. You'll see AIG and JP Morgan Chase up there. And that has to do with their role in financing fossil fuel related projects, as well as underwriting on the insurance side. Next slide, please. So here's a diagram of our flowchart of our shareholder engagement process. So this is what MRTI does and has done since its inception. We review directives and referrals from the General Assembly, collaborate partners, research companies or industries, and then start to correspond with companies. And the goal is also to get a dialogue with the company, because that's where we find that a lot of change happens, is engaging at a high level. Most of the time we are meeting with fairly high-ranking C-suite type representatives, senior vice presidents, executive vice presidents, occasionally CEOs, and occasionally board members of publicly traded corporations. When those dialogues either don't happen or don't bear fruit, we occasionally file shareholder proposals or shareholder resolutions. And shareholder resolution is a very effective way to get a company's attention, to get a company's board's attention. So any shareholder that has held a certain amount of shares for a certain amount of time can file a 500-word shareholder resolution or proposal on a major policy issue, that is not getting into the company's ordinary business or has not been substantially implemented. Anybody can do that, and we do that. We work with big coalitions of other investors, including large state pension funds, our sibling denominations that have pension funds or foundations, and a wide variety of other types of values-based asset managers. We do this and file these proposals, and more often than not, we can get the company to make a significant commitment that's in the spirit of the proposal. And when that happens, we're able to withdraw the proposal so it doesn't go to the proxy, which is the kind of the annual voting card of that any shareholder can exercise their right to vote by voting their shares. So if the company doesn't make a significant commitment, or we don't determine it as such, we will let that proposal go to vote, and then we try to work with other proxy advisory firms or other large asset managers to try to get the vote as high as possible. And MRTI has in recent years had some pretty significant high votes, and last of which was with United Airlines on a climate-related lobbying proposal that got about 66% of the shareholder votes. So when votes get relatively high, usually depending on where they are on the issue, over 20% gets the attention of the company. As you get closer to 50%, you get action from the company if they don't already take it. And I should mention, companies do not like these proposals, and so they're usually very motivated to get them off their proxy. So they're motivated to make a commitment to us. So the last box there is if over a period of time, if we have given adequate policy directives from the General Assembly, if no movement takes place, we will occasionally recommend a selected divestment from a company. And as the video said, that is the last tool of shareholder engagement. It's a very important tool, but it's the last tool. And in some ways, from an MRTI perspective, it is an admission to failure. We are saying we can no longer we don't think our engagement is going to move this company in the direction we're trying to move it in. So we are recommending selective divestment. And when that happens, the company's name is the company bears some reputational risk when they are selected out of their industry peers. And we have a process for that, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Next slide, please. So here's some examples of recent successful engagements that MRTI led. So these were shareholder proposals that we led on with companies: AIG, a large international insurance company, Entergy, PPL, or publicly traded utility companies, and American Airlines. With AIG, they were pretty much considered to be the laggard in North American insurance companies on their work on environmental responsibility and climate change mitigation. And we've worked with them for a number of years, filed a proposal in 2 years ago that asked them to adopt a policy for no new underwriting of any new fossil fuel projects. And they set some robust targets that included a net zero greenhouse gas emissions across their underwriting and investment portfolios by mid-century, use of science-based emissions reductions targets, and no longer invest or provide insurance for construction of any new coal-fired power plants, thermal coal mines, or oil sands, or any more in the Arctic Circle, any more work in the Arctic Circle, which was the most significant move that an American-based insurer had made to that point. We're still working with them to try to get them to disclose how they're going to get there on these targets, but at the time it was very significant. With Entergy and PPL, we started engaging them on climate-related lobbying, how their trade associations were aligned or not aligned with their own stated.
Get to the farm bill. Is the farm bill being discussed during this hour?
Climate change. I think it's out of the purview of this this guy, but potentially. Yes, tomorrow. I said this. Thank you. And finally, American Airlines. We filed a climate-related lobbying proposal with them to get them to disclose how they're aligned or misaligned with trade associations, because American Airlines has some robust goals for climate mitigation, but there are members of trade associations that are barriers for advancing positive climate policy. So they agreed to disclose all the trade associations, explain how they're aligned or not aligned, and engage with the trade associations where they're not aligned, and potentially leave those trade associations if they can't find alignment. So we found that was a significant win. Next slide, please. So now I'll talk a little bit about the recommendations, MRTI's recommendations for the 225th General Assembly, which happened last year in 2022. So first, as in everything, MRTI starts with our theological underpinnings and kind of the how the Presbyterian Church, through our investments, are considering the most serious and dire issues of our time. So this is a direct report or a direct excerpt from our report to the 225th General Assembly, and shows the emergency and the crisis with which MRTI views the climate crisis, and how important it is that we address it with all of our faculties that we have and all of our tools. Next slide, please. So at MRTI, in our report, we had many recommendations. The two most significant probably were these two that you see in front of you. Recommendation 5 was to recommend adding companies, the 7 companies you see here that are heavy emitters of greenhouse gases, to our list of focused engagement companies. And you'll see the word Climate Action 100 Plus mentioned, or the phrase Climate Action 100 Plus. That is the largest coalition with which MRTI works of responsible investors. This is over 700 institutional investors representing something like $68 trillion of assets under management that are united for one goal, which is to move the 166 largest emitters of greenhouse gases, publicly traded companies, the 166 largest emitters, to manage their operations towards achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement, which is keeping average global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius. So that is a reason for why those companies were selected. And to add to the companies that came from a recommendation from the previous General Assembly in 2018, ConocoPhillips, Duke Energy, Ford, and General Motors. That's for focused engagement with potential selected divestment down the road. And then the big recommendation was number 6 there, which was asking the Assembly to adopt the following resolution to add Chevron, ExxonMobil, Marathon Petroleum, Phillips 66, and Valero Energy to the annual divestment and prescription list. Next slide, please. So this slide is intentionally unreadable. It is. It was also this is the guideline metrics framework that MRTI uses to evaluate companies to really put into action the General Assembly directive. And this framework was affirmed by the 223rd General Assembly and reaffirmed by the 225th General Assembly. And it includes. I think the old was 39 criteria, but I think we just updated it in June to be the most robust, highest standard possible. And I think it's a few more criteria, but it is broken out it's included on our website, and it's broken out by environmental, social governance. It is designed to measure if companies are in fact managing their operations towards achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. Next slide, please. And here were the evaluations that MRTI came up with. Again, these were the original 9 companies that the 223rd General Assembly asked MRTI to focus on in 2018. This is where they scored on our framework. And MRTI in the fall of 2021 made a one-time policy saying any company that ended up in the red or orange tiers would be advanced in our report to the General Assembly to recommend divestment. And you can see those are the 5 companies that fell into the orange or red tiers. Next slide, please. So at the General Assembly, the MRTI report passed by close to 90% of the votes in less than about 10 minutes of debates, which was very encouraging, because it showed that the Assembly was really on the same page with this recommendation. And then the divestment recommendations went to the boards of all the investing agencies, and the vehicle for that was the divestment prescription list. And all of those investing agency boards approved the divestment list in full later that fall. So the Assembly happened in July. MRTI assembled and approved the divestment list in October, and by the end of the year, the 5 companies were implemented. That action was implemented by the investment agency, so they're out of the investment agency's portfolios. Next slide, please. And finally, that is to which I was referring. That is our divestment list. It's on the MRTI webpage. And we are in the process of developing the 2024 divestment list, which MRTI will consider at its meeting next month. And when it's approved, it then goes to the boards of the investment agencies, and it'll be posted to our website usually in December, and then goes into effect on January 1 the following year. So with that, I will pass it back to my colleague, Gianna.
So you've heard from Carrie and Rob, part of the process of how the General Assembly that meets every 2 years now, and as commissioners and advisory delegates discerns God's will, Christ's will in the world, and how we are called into being more faithful, how they translate those policies into direct social and corporate engagement with companies. And then the sort of question then becomes, how do we then move from that engagement and also make sure that that's implemented in a way that offers options for individuals and presbyteries and synods and other Presbyterian related institutions to invest in a socially responsible way. And that's through the partnership between MRTI and New Covenant Trust Company. And so that happens in a few different ways, or several different ways. One of them that's very important is the reciprocal support through the sharing of human resources. So there are NCTC board members who serve on MRTI. So I'm one of those folks who actually, I'm the person who goes from the NCTC board and sits on MRTI, so that there are conversations and communication lines that continue to stay open. But more importantly, finally, there are NCTC staff who support the work of MRTI. So there is, again, constant communication happening between implementation and analysis of General Assembly policy and corporate engagement all the way through implementation. The other pieces that are part of this partnership are the sort of technical knowledge and interpretation pieces. And so you'll see on the next slide here that the understanding and interpretation of GA policy happens with MRTI in the lead, but with New Covenant Trust Company. MRTI also shares the corporate engagement information with NCTC. The guideline metrics that you saw, Rob explained, those are also shared with NCTC as well. And the negative screening guidance, MRTI actually shares those again through the divestment and prescription list. But also the sort of other direction, NCTC shares third-party environmental, social governance analysis, so that MRTI is working with solid analysis that is not just sort of the work of the folks sitting in the committee, but through other parties that are actually doing that analysis on a broader range. And so that partnership continues to be very important. And I will pass this on to Greg.
Hey. Great, thank you, Jihan. It's an honor to be here, so thanks for allowing us to have this time and to share some information with you. Very important to us. I want to just cover real quickly who New Covenant Trust Company is. So the next slide. We exist to serve you. As Jihan said, we help you, whether it's a congregation, an individual, a presbytery, synod, an agency, implement the good work of MRTI. Our call and our passion is that there are healthy and vibrant ministries in the PCUSA. And our call in that regard is helping with stewardship, helping with investments, and making sure there are solid, sound ways that you invest according to the values and the directives of the General Assembly. New Covenant Trust Company is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Presbyterian Foundation. We are a separate corporation. We have our own board, our own officers. So we are charged with doing the work of a trust company. We are actually regulated by the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. We're chartered as a limited purpose trust bank. So we are federally regulated. We have exams, we have reports we file, and we hope that really instills confidence in all of you to know that your investments and our internal controls are sound and they're examined by federal regulators. We really do all this through a culture of servant leadership. We have a staff, I think, that really parallels what you would find in any sort of brokerage firm, investment management firm. We have people that have a CFA, a CFP, a CPA. We have attorneys. We have the whole bunch, the whole lot that are experts in this field. And, our philosophy really is founded on the faith and the values of PCUSA. And that's why our partnership with MRTI is so important. That really informs our work, that really helps us work with congregations, presbyteries, and synods. And our priority has always been to take the best care of you, our clients, and we really do that by listening to what your values are, what's important to you, what's your time horizon, risk tolerance, all that is, so we can construct portfolios that best serve you and best meet your goals and objectives. A lot of times you can think, and people will say to me, Greg, aren't investments just commodities? Can't I just go buy those anywhere? Well, sure you can. You can go buy investments just about anywhere, right? But what's different about us is we are part of the PCUSA. Values are very important to us, and your values are very important to us. And we want to invest funds consistent with your values. That's why we were excited to launch a fossil fuel-free investment strategy, why we were excited to launch a diversity, equity, and inclusion investment strategy, and James will talk about that. So values play a part in investments. They are a reflection of your values, and they're a witness to the world of what's important to you, how you invest your money. Also, our fees. that we earn all flow up to the Presbyterian Foundation. They don't go to shareholders. They don't go to secular organizations, corporations, individuals. Our fees are reinvested into the ministry of the church through the Presbyterian Foundation. And last, what James will say in a little bit is if you look at performance, investment performance, people might say, well, what about fees? What about screens? What about values-based investing? Does that compromise performance? We don't believe it has to. We believe you can invest in a responsible way and get market-based performance. So are investments a commodity? Well, maybe, but they're not to us. There is value to making sure they're invested in a responsible way. Fees go to ministry and performance is strong and competitive. So I know James is excited to share more information about New Covenant Trust Company. Again, excited to be here, excited to serve you however best. I'm going to turn it over to James.
Well, thank you, Greg, and good afternoon, everyone. Am I pretty much directly in your all's way on it? Can you see the slides okay? Great. Well, yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about responsible investment and how to do responsible investment. I think everybody in this conference probably knows the why. We know how urgent it is that we do something now to push companies towards environmental sustainability, that we don't accept the status quo as it relates to how corporate America has handled, putting profits above a number of things, including environmental sustainability. So in this workshop, we're really going to just focus a little bit on the how. How do we do this? How do we bring investments into these efforts? Being a responsible investor is not going to be the only thing that solves these problems, but it is one more thing. It is one more thing that we can do, and it's something that we can do to really holistically address these issues that we care so much about. It's not, we care about these things, we talk about these things, and it's important in everything except for our money, except for our investments. This is a way that you can incorporate this witness and these efforts as well into your investments. So if you look at the slide that's up right now, this is a slide from the United Nations, Principles for Responsible Investing. And on the left side of the slide, you will see the three tools that we have available to us as responsible investors to drive impact when we're building portfolios, when we're selecting companies, selecting investments. On the right side is what you can do once you're a shareholder. And this is the really, I think, sometimes overlooked aspect of being a responsible investor is being an active shareholder, not just being a silent shareholder and accepting anything that the company you own does, but being an active shareholder with your shares. And we'll talk about how that impacts companies as well. So on the next slide. The first tool we have when building portfolios is negative screening, divestment. And Rob talked a little bit about this as well. Essentially, negative screening is divesting from an industry or a product or a company that no matter what they commit to, no matter what they improve, they're just not going to be compatible with your values. This may be for-profit prisons. It may be manufacturers of assault weapons and handguns. You just can't root for that stock to go up, right? You just can't own it. This is, a negative screening or divestment approach to responsible investing. And it's an important one, but one that most people know about. On the next slide, Katie. Just a practical example of a negative screening strategy. This is the fossil fuel free strategy, NCTC's fossil fuel free strategy. It's been in place since about 2015. A Presbyterian church helped seed this fund with capital, and in doing so, provided across the denomination to other churches. And it's been really growing, I think, impressively. Always room to grow more, but it has been growing impressively across the country. But this divests from anything associated with the fossil fuel industry, drilling, refining, transporting, manufacturing drill bits. If you want a large cap US stock portfolio that is completely divested from that sector, then this is that approach. And what we've been pleased with now that it's almost 8 years old is it has provided market returns consistent with the S&P 500. You have not sacrificed returns in this fund, which is something that we believe is important. And also are, of course, happy with. Next slide. The next one that's a little newer is positive screening or positive integration. So this is rating companies on positive or proactive metrics. You may be looking at airlines, but you're looking at the most sustainable airlines in the industry. You may be looking at banks, but you're looking at who are the banks that are doing the most lending in low and moderate income, zip codes? Who are the banks that have the most diverse and equitable workforce, that kind of thing. And you are overweighting for investment companies that are doing these proactive things. And in doing so, as more and more capital flows into these strategies and takes this approach to investing, you're putting pressure on companies to keep up with their peers. They don't want to be the laggard in their industry because now they're going to lose investment capital if more and more investors are taking this approach. Another interesting part of this strategy is we are beginning to see more and more data and evidence that companies that are the most proactive in these areas also tend to be better run companies and oftentimes are financial outperformers in their industry. So it's also, some people look at this just as a savvy investment decision and a signal that these companies have good management. So this has been kind of a growing area of the industry as well. On the next slide, we'll see just another example of this. We did launch a couple of years ago a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy at New Covenant Trust Company. And this rated the US stock market and companies in that index based on a number of measures, including board and management diversity, measures to promote equal opportunity and diversity, supply chain standards relating to labor rights and human rights in their supply chain, climate change strategy, and community reinvestment for these companies. And only the top companies were eligible for investment. So these are best in class companies based on those measures. And the pursuant portfolio that we came up with did have 76% higher levels of diverse executives, 42% higher levels of diverse board members, 38% higher levels of women executives, and 25% higher levels of women board members than the index average. And this is also a strategy that, again, is about 2 years old, but has been outperforming its index as well. And so has been showing that some of these companies that, again, are best in class on these measures have proven to be more resilient companies, especially in last year's bear market. These were companies that were really holding up well and have been good financial performers as well. So that's an example of positive screening. Next slide. Finally, impact investing, sometimes referred to as thematic investing. This is when you invest to earn a market rate of return and earn a market rate of interest, but you're financing or supporting something that has a positive environmental or social impact associated with it. So you may be investing in mortgages that finance affordable housing apartments, for example, bonds that finance renewable energy projects. You earn that market rate of return, but you are financing something, again, that is going to have a positive impact. Just an example of this is Freddie Mac launched a Green Advantage bond in 2016. And in order to qualify for this loan that financed apartment construction, the apartments had to reduce their energy and water consumption by a total of 30% in order to qualify for this financing. More than 1,600 properties have been financed through the program, and the projected savings are over 4.7 billion gallons of water, and a significant amount of electricity has been reduced as well from these more efficient apartment constructions. They're also predominantly affordable housing apartments as well. So this is, almost every bond portfolio has mortgages. Why not have mortgages that support, green buildings, affordable housing, these types of things? While you earn that market rate of interest, you're also providing finance for some of these positive and proactive, projects. Next slide. Finally, my favorite slide. As we look at the investment performance, we really do believe that you do not have to sacrifice investment performance to participate in these strategies. When we look at responsible investing and pursuing impact with your investments, we believe that it is just additive to your investing. You want to invest, earn a market rate of return. At the same time, you are a responsible investor. You're an active shareholder. You are doing positive screening. It's not a sacrifice of returns. And here you'll see a pretty well-known sort of responsible investing strategy that's been around for a long time. On the bottom of that 1 year, you'll see, in the 1 year, it underperformed the market by about 2%. On the 3 year, it outperformed it. Sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down. But over 10 years, you'll see that it's within 0.02% of the market. And this is exactly how we want to be responsible investors. We want to have valid portfolios, good portfolios. We don't want to sacrifice investment merit when we're doing this. And you can see, in investing this way, you can earn that market return. You can be right there with the market, while also incorporating your values and responsible investing. So again, a holistic approach to impact. Sometimes I say that at New Covenant Trust Company, we'll use every tool we have available to us to drive positive impact, to drive corporate change. And we'll use, all three of these. We think it's important not just to narrow in on divestment, not just to narrow in on any one of these, but to incorporate each of them, including on the right, again, what you do once you are a shareholder. Once you do own part of a company, what kind of shareholder are you? And on the next slide, we'll highlight that. Don't ignore proxy voting. As Rob mentioned, that proxy that comes up at the annual shareholder meetings, these have become a very important part of the impact movement in sort of responsible investing. On the bottom here, you can't see it, but the 285 resolutions was 2020. And 2020 was really the turning point for these efforts. People really decided that they weren't going to stand by and be just, passive shareholders. There was a real surge in activity. And since then, it's even grown more. 504 resolutions passed by faith-based investors in the Faith-Based Coalition, the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility. ICCR, the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility, is a coalition of faith-based investors representing over $4 trillion in managed assets. So when, this coalition and everyone gets together and, says that, a company needs to take a stand on certain issues, this is a coalition that companies pay attention to and that can oftentimes get meetings with these companies as well. So all working together, all working in coalition in a very active process, I think has been one of the big impacts, one of the underrated impacts in these efforts. So on the next slide, Katie. We'll see how some of these resolutions have gone. There was a record number in 2022, 37 resolutions passed with a majority vote. So, the context of this is if a resolution like this gets a majority vote, that means probably the company didn't want it, management didn't want it, and the shareholders overrode them. We had 37 majority votes in 2022. These orange ones, the bright orange, are climate related. The sort of turquoise blue are diversity and inclusion related. And so this coalition, just this one coalition of faith-based investors, has been very productive, very impactful. You'll see Chevron at the top there had a resolution in pushing these companies to make changes. And on the next slide, Katie, we'll see that, as Rob mentioned it as well, it's not just going to a vote and getting that majority vote that's going to be a win for faith-based investors, but also withdrawals. This means that the company said, okay, we'll give you what you want, or we'll make progress here. We don't have to bring it to a vote. And there were a number of withdrawals, and you'll see if you can read the small print, but Presbyterian Church is on 3 of these in the climate agreement section. So the PCUSA was able to get 3, was lead filer on 3 of these withdrawals, PPL, AIG, and Entergy. And was very involved, of course, in many of these as well. So you'll see climate is a big one, diversity and inclusion, corporate governance. So don't ignore proxy voting. I think, people underrate what it means to vote in accordance with your values, to vote and be involved in these votes. Many people probably aren't even aware of, but these can be hugely impactful if you do it with big groups of like-minded investors. So just a couple of final do's and don'ts to responsible investing. We would say if you want to be a responsible investor, work with a provider that focuses on responsible investing and impact. This has become a little bit of, in some ways, a trend in the industry. And, you know, the Presbyterian Church has been doing this since the beginning. You might say a real pioneer in this effort dating back over 50 years. But, you know, some providers may, you know, just only know negative screening, only know divestment. They have one fund that they know. You know, if you're really going to do this well, I think it's important to really focus on or work with a provider that focuses on this as a majority part of their business. Don't sacrifice investment merit. Make sure that you have a good portfolio. Make sure that you demand having a good portfolio if you're going to do this. You don't have to sacrifice investment performance. Document your investment goals. This is important if you're, you know, a church committee, those types of things. This is really going to be a best practice for continuation if the committee rolls over and that type of thing, that people know what the values are, what the screens are, and that can sort of live on. And then otherwise really follow typical investment best practices. You should, you know, not stop being an investor. You should focus on diversification, focus on low fees, focus on a quality portfolio, and again, add responsible investing to this strategy. So, okay, the next one. A couple of don'ts that we see, you know, we can at times see over concentrations in portfolios. So we may see a responsible investing portfolio that's almost all Silicon Valley technology, or almost all software companies. These may be relatively green companies, but that's not the way typically to do responsible investing, because from an investment standpoint, you're really over concentrated in just one area. Don't change your investment approach just to access a green or responsible fund. If you believe in, you know, low cost portfolios, don't buy a high cost fund just because it's responsible. If you believe in diversified portfolios, don't buy a real concentrated fund just because it's responsible. You can, and we know this because we do it, you can achieve all of the, you know, best practices of investing and be a responsible investor if you find the right options. Big one, oh, sorry, Katie. Big one, don't fail to ensure your fund managers are voting proxies. We talked about how important this is. This is an easy, it doesn't cost you any extra to make sure that your fund managers are voting these proxies and are doing this work. You should really be sure to ask them and make sure that that's part of their process. And then again, don't ignore performance, don't ignore portfolio construction. Responsible investing can and should be good investing, is how we believe is the best way to do it. So next slide, just wrapping up here. A couple of additional resources if you're interested. Along the Road podcast is a podcast out of the Office of the General Assembly, and there were a couple of episodes this year with Greg and some others at New Covenant Trust Company that you can listen to if you're into podcasts. There's also a book, Faithful Investing, which was very ecumenical in terms of his authorship. A number of chapters written by Greg and others at New Covenant Trust Company, so you can check that out as well. But with that, I will turn it to Brad to let you know how to get in touch with us. Greg?
I was going to just add one thing. You know, Rob mentioned and Carrie mentioned that the you know, MRTI works with the investing agencies defined as a Presbyterian Foundation and the Board of Pensions. Well, as James went through all that, many of our congregations, our presbytery synods, institutions, and agencies have investments. They own stock. They have bonds in their portfolio. If you own stock, you're an owner of a company. If you have a bond, you're lending money to a company. That there should be some responsibility related to that, to think through, do I really want to own this stock? Do I really want to be a part owner or shareholder in a company? Do I want to be a creditor to a company? Those kinds of things. So as we go through all of this, and as Rob and Carrie pointed out, MRTI works primarily with the investing agencies. Well, the PCUSA, there's lots of congregations, presbytery, synods, and such that have investments. And hopefully we can encourage them to think, like we have all said, to say, you know, it really does matter what you own, where you lend your money, those kinds of things for folks to consider. So sorry about that, James. I'll turn it over to Brian.
All right, well, thanks, everybody. I think we may, yep, one more, my favorite slide, James, right? No. Just to sort of put a bow on this, this is our shameless call to action, right? we would love to engage with you, right? As you, wherever you are in this particular journey, to better understand how what we've been talking about might apply to you as an individual or as a family from an investment standpoint. Certainly for your churches, your mid-councils, there are just there are hundreds of clients now that we serve across the country, the vast majority of which are Presbyterian institutions, individuals connected to the PCUSA, as well as some ecumenical partnerships as well. So doing this kind of work, serving those just like you, this is our lane. This is it for us, right? And so we welcome those conversations. Happy to sort of stack up or compare ourselves and our services against maybe other secular providers as well. That opportunity to lift the hood, to listen, to learn, right? More about how all this sort of applies to you in your specific context, but to talk more about process and cost and performance and risk and spending and policies. There's just a whole range of things that we wish to bring into those conversations, right? To make sure that there's good governance in place, right? If we're talking about a church or a mid-council, that there's good policies, good practices, spending, as we've talked about as well. So a lot that we can offer as it relates to just kind of all things financial for you. There are a few different ways that you can get to us. I've included my contact information here. I lead our client engagement activities for the New Covenant Trust Company. We do have a few folks scattered throughout the country. So if you would start with me, that's fine, and glad to redirect and include others. But in addition to us specifically in the trust company, as a subsidiary of the foundation, you do have foundation representatives as well. We refer to them as ministry relations officers or MROs. And I'll give you just a few names in addition to the website that's listed here where you can find your specific MRO. For those of you in the room here, sort of Lakes and Prairies area, right? Kyle Nolan is your MRO. If you know Kyle, great. If you don't, let us help you get introduced to him. For those of you in Massanet Springs, maybe that mid-Atlantic area, the Southeast, you might be talking to Orlando Carr, maybe Sandra Moon, or Robert Hay, just to give you a few names there to go along with, again, colleagues on the foundation side who they themselves offer another range of resources related to stewardship and plan giving. And again, lots of different ways that we wish to engage with you. Just said a lot. And we do on time. I think we're pretty close. Maybe we've got a little bit of time now to open up for questions. Quite sure how we navigate that across. There you go, friends in Virginia and around the country. There's some questions in the chat, but as a panel here, we will work to address the questions that you might have. So we'll open it up.
One question in chat: how does NCTC decide its votes on proxies?
That's a James or Greg, either one. Yeah.
Yeah, so for our stock shares, we're going to vote with MRTI, just like the Presbyterian Foundation shares. If we have mutual funds that we hold, again, we're very careful to ensure that mutual fund partners that we work with are involved in proxy voting and do typically vote with that Interfaith Center on corporate responsibility. We have some good partners, some great partners in the responsible investing space that are involved in that coalition, and so oftentimes are voting right along with MRTI from a mutual fund perspective. That's a good question.
One thing I'll add to that is, the MRTI every year produces two key resources. One is the divestment prescription list that comes out in the beginning of the year, the calendar year. And then the second is our proxy voting recommendations, which comes out usually around April. The vast majority of publicly traded companies, about 80% of them, have their annual general meetings in May and June. So we take the proposals that are filed through our primarily the Interfaith Center Corporate Responsibility Coalition, and MRTI reviews all of those and maps them onto existing PCUSA policy, and then votes whether MRTI supports those or not, or recommending abstention. And then those recommendations are posted on our webpage, and they go to our colleagues at New Covenant Trust Company, Presbyterian Foundation, and the Board of Pensions, but are usable for anybody else in the church. And we often hear from congregations, mid-councils, other entities that have Presbyterian-related capital, and they are looking forward every year to those two resources. And if you're not using those, I'd encourage you to take a look if you feel so called.
Excellent. Katie, are there others in there? I think I just saw one pop up about serving individuals, perhaps.
Yes.
That's an easy one for me. That's a yes. Right. We do offer services to individuals, right? Families, again, institutional clients as well as individual clients for sure. So feel free to contact us or let us know how we can contact you to learn more. We've got a question, I think, here in the room. Yes, sir. How you doing?
Can I get a mic?
Sure. There you go.
I was intrigued by the comment that the divestment passed by about 90%. I've been around the church at the national level for probably 35 years. And there was a lot of discussion about values. And I can remember some of the debates on General Assembly. And by and large, anything that comes to the floor of General Assembly is usually based on competing values, that different people have different values. And I can remember the discussion over Caterpillar, for example, involving people who worked for Caterpillar or was a part of their community and so forth. Does the 90% mean that we're getting close to unanimity in the Presbyterian Church about climate change and what the church ought to be doing?
So thanks for that question. I think that in terms of the issue of climate change, I think that there is consensus that there's a crisis. And where there's been, in previous General Assemblies, recent years after that Caterpillar divestment, where requests for categorical divestment continuously were not passed. So our approach really is looking at it from a Reformed theological perspective and ethical underpinnings, where we identify that an understanding that purity is we can't achieve purity. And so the selective divestment that we did by following the process that's been outlined, 7 criteria that were established in 1984, I think after there really was an understanding of the work that MRTI did to look at all of these companies, and that it was through that understanding, as well as an understanding of these are also the things that the agencies, the entities can implement. So there are other times that have come before the assembly, like categorical divestment, that don't align with those criteria. Thank you. The 7